Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for my official 2024 NFL preview and predictions video. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't sit and watch this video all the way through, I will find out because of the analytics and stuff. It's really amazing what technology can do. And I will find you and I will kiss you on the lips. Now, that is not a threat. That is a promise. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this video because I need the money very, very badly. But all joking aside, please do enjoy the video. And also maybe lend me about $500,000. Starting off with the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills. I have the Bills winning the division once again for the 5th straight season, although I do think they will get a run for their money, not by the Dolphins, but by the Jets. The story here is simple. I don't think losing Stephon Diggs will be as big of a deal as it seems to be, but again, pretty simple. If you combine Josh Allen in his prime with an elite defense, which is what the Bills' recipe has really been over the last 5 years or so, you're going to get a very successful team. The question with the Bills, of course, is what they can do in the playoffs and whether or not they can overcome Patrick Mahomes, but regular season wise, they are proven to be a juggernaut recently and one of the elite teams in the league, and that's where they stay. New York Jets. I do believe because last year the Jets were so hyped in the preseason because of Aaron Rodgers getting there and they had a young elite defense, and then we all know it went up in smoke 4 snaps into the season when Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles, and people kind of forgot about the Jets because they were playing dog shit at quarterback for the whole season. But their defense was still elite. They still do have an elite defense right now. I think a player to watch, you want to be under the radar, a player to watch to break out, Will McDonald. Just keep that name in mind. But I think if you give this team adequate quarterback play, which they didn't have last year, then they're going to be very, very good. So I think that all the expectations and the hype, I think they're not nearly as hyped coming into this season, but I do believe that the talent is still there. And people have kind of forgotten about them a little bit because they were last year's flavor of the week or whatever, what have you. But I think that they're going to be very, very serious. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to have to put up monster numbers, but I mean, even if Aaron Rodgers isn't what he once was, he still is better than Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian. Miami Dolphins. I feel like Miami for the last couple years, they've always had these hot starts and they have these massive games where like last year they scored 70 points against Denver and they start off the year so hot and everyone thinks, oh, they're a title favorite because they got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and then they kind of cool off as the season goes along. I think last year they did catch a huge break with Aaron Rodgers getting hurt, so I do believe that they'll finish around the same type of record, but I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year, even though I still think they'll have a good team or a decent team. I think they're going to finish around 10-7, but they're going to miss the playoffs because they're going to finish 3rd in the AFC East. I don't think they're as good as the Bills or the Jets with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. And really that does go back to the quarterback. Do I trust Tua late in the season in colder weather? No, I don't. I don't trust Tua in big games. That's just how it is. Until that happens, I think Miami is going to be on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs this year. And finally, we got the Patriots, and they're going to be a distant 4th. They're going to be distant, especially if they're going to be trotting out Jacoby Brissett, which makes no fucking sense to me. You drafted Drake May, 3rd overall, or whatever, 3rd, right? He was a top 3 pick. He looked really good in preseason. Just fucking play him at quarterback instead of starting a journeyman for 5 or 6 games. Like, it doesn't matter. It's so fucking annoying when teams do this. Like, if you're a quarterback, you either got it or you don't. If Drake May is going to go on to become an all-time great, it's not because he sat and watched Jacoby Brissett play like shit for 6 games. For some reason, people have this idea of like, oh, well, Patrick Mahomes sat for his first season. Yeah, and that might have been the worst decision Andy Reid's made since 2017 because the Chiefs might have won the Super Bowl in 2017 if Patrick Mahomes was a quarterback instead of Alex Smith. Mahomes didn't become great because he fucking sat and watched Alex Smith play for 16 games. Like, seriously, give me a fucking break. But anyway, New England is stuck in the same quagmire as before. They're in a rebuilding process. They got rid of Belichick, obviously, but this is a team that they're in a tough division and they're in a very long rebuild. It's the exact opposite of how things were for 20 years from 2001 to 2019. AFC North, Baltimore Ravens. That's right. Once again, I have the Baltimore Ravens continuing their excellent regular season success that they've had since they inserted Lamar Jackson as a starting quarterback in 2019. The guy wins, literally statistically, he wins regular season games at the same rate as Tom Brady did with the Patriots. So as long as Lamar Jackson's healthy, which to be fair is somewhat of a question because this dude has like the weakest immune system ever. Like every year there's at least 3 or 4 instances where the guy misses practice with an illness. I'm not even joking. I mean, we make jokes about him going to the porta potty and taking a poop during a game, but I mean, my goodness, this guy must have like irritable bowel syndrome or something that we don't know about. But as long as Lamar is on the field and healthy in the regular season, the Ravens are a massive problem to deal with, and I see them being in contention for the 1st overall seed again and a 1st round bye again. But much like Buffalo and really every other team in the AFC, it all is going to run through Kansas City, whether or not they can beat Kansas City. And in the playoffs, if they match up with Kansas City, do I trust Lamar Jackson with his playoff history to come through over Patrick Mahomes? No. We saw what happened last year, and I don't see any reason to believe why it wouldn't change. But in the regular season, this team is an absolute juggernaut. After them, we got Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be a big year, I believe. Again, I've talked about it in other videos. Joe Burrow, sneaky injury prone. He's played 4 seasons. Half of his seasons have ended with a major injury. The other 2 seasons, obviously, were so good, going to a Super Bowl and AFC Championship game, that it made people forget about the 2 injury seasons. I think, again, as long as Burrow is healthy, Cincinnati is a team that can do some damage, although I do believe that really a big reason for their success, at least in 2021 and 2022, was the fact that Lamar Jackson got hurt and missed a substantial amount of time. So I'm just assuming that since Lamar is going to be healthy again, that the Bengals are going to finish second in the AFC North, and they're going to snag a wild card spot. You know, again, because Burrow and Jamar Chase, those two have a rapport that is supernatural almost, and they still got a decent defense. So they're still going to be a respectable team, but I don't see them, 2021 and 2022, I think, might be a little bit of flukes, in my opinion. Third place, we got the Cleveland Browns. I got Cleveland finishing 10-7, and that's largely because I believe their defense is once again going to be elite. I don't really know what to expect from Groper Cleveland to quarterback. I mean, at this point, I say it every time I do an NFL video, he hasn't been good since 2020. He hasn't had a good season with fans in the stands since 2019. So is he still even a good quarterback? And this is without all the off-field baggage being taken into account and the massive contract being taken into account. It wasn't until really Joe Flacco turning into Patrick Mahomes for like 3 weeks randomly, 3 or 4 weeks at the end of the season last year, that got them into the playoffs. Is Watson capable of doing that? Is he capable of even staying healthy for a full season anymore? We don't know. But I think Cleveland will be respectable because of their elite defense. Nick Chubb coming back from an injury will also help, but I think it's Cleveland. Cleveland's got, the shitty luck, and they're going to be on the outside looking in, much like Miami, with a 10-7 record. And finally, I'm going to end with Pittsburgh. Now, there's something about this that I don't feel comfortable with Pittsburgh, because there's just some type of power that Mike Tomlin has, where every year, no matter how shitty the team is, they always finish 9-8, or they always finish above 500. But one of these fucking years, that has to change. One of these years, these motherfuckers are the bottom's going to fall out, and they're going to finish under 500, and so all the Mike Tomlin supporters won't have that, well, he's never had a losing season, nugget to fall back on. You got Russell Wilson, this is like Minnesota Donovan McNabb, and then you got Justin Fields, who's dog shit as your quarterbacks. So you replaced Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph you replaced dog shit with dog shit, basically, a quarterback. The same story. Pittsburgh, one of the worst, most boring teams to watch. They fuck every game up. They make every game they play in completely unwatchable. And so I want them, maybe this is just me wanting them to be terrible, so I don't have to sit and watch them in another playoff game. But I have them finishing 6-11. But in reality, there's a part of me that knows that they'll somehow finish like 12-5 despite averaging 10 points a game. That's just I don't know. It's just the Mike Tomlin conundrum, where nobody knows if he's good or bad. He's either the best worst coach ever, or he's the worst best coach ever. AFC South, starting with Houston. Now, this is a division that's just complete crap all the way through. And with the AFC South, the big story last year was the rise of Houston. They won it in the final week of the season, head-to-head versus the Colts. And I guess just with the way things are unwinding, I kind of see things happening in a very similar way this season as well. I think that Houston will win the division, although they're not going to be a great team record-wise. I think CJ Stroud, it's going to be interesting to see whether he will live up to the hype that he's gotten after his amazing rookie season, or whether he'll hit a sophomore slump. We just have to wait and see, but I do think that there are some areas. Again, I think signing Danielle Hunter was the most underrated signing of the offseason in free agency. But it's just one of those things where I go game by game, and I just found, hey, they're going to be around 10-7 again. And it's going to be enough to win the division, but I don't consider them title contenders. I still think they're a few pieces away from being in the same tier as the Chiefs or the Ravens or the Bills. Indianapolis Colts. I have the Colts, again, finishing just behind the Texans in the division and missing the playoffs by a hair. Although this year, hopefully, we finally get to see Anthony Richardson instead of being stuck with Gardner Minshew like we were last year. Anthony Richardson, every time I talk about him, it's the same thing. The physical tools are sky sky high. He has Hall of Fame tools physically, arm strength, athleticism, what have you. But already we've seen that his style of play, where he runs the ball, puts his body on the line, it can lead to injuries and significant missed time. So he's just going to have to become a better passer. Unless you're Lamar Jackson, who has kind of like a supernatural ability to avoid being hit really hard. If you're a running quarterback, usually your shelf life isn't very long. And I'm hoping, as a fan of his, that he's able to become a better pocket passer and learn how to read defenses better so he can stay healthy for longer. Or else his career is going to go the same way that Cam Newton's went, which isn't a terrible thing. Cam Newton had a great MVP season, but basically you're talking about less than a decade of good play, which in today's NFL isn't that much. So the Colts are going to go as Anthony Richardson goes. I do think that they got themselves a gem with Laiatu Latu in the draft. I think he's going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year, personally. That's one of my predictions. But again, I think this is a team that is just a year or two away, depending on Richardson's development, from really making some noise. I don't think they're there yet. Jacksonville Jaguars. This rating of Jacksonville is really a reflection of my opinion of Trevor Lawrence. And much like with a lot of teams, really relies on your quarterback for how well you do or how well you don't do. And we've seen with the Jaguars just the past couple years, where a couple years ago they made the playoffs when Lawrence had a very, very strong end of the season and they won a bunch of games in a row. And then last year we saw them do the exact opposite, where they had a big lead and it looked like, oh, well, this is going to be the team in the AFC South for a while. And then, boom, they ended up just crapping their pants and Lawrence was terrible to end the season and they missed the playoffs. And I have a feeling, my gut tells me that it's going to be another season where Lawrence is mediocre and they're going to lose a couple games that they should win. And I say this all the time with young quarterbacks that are highly touted, and in recent memory, there really hasn't been any quarterback that was more highly touted than Trevor Lawrence coming into the league. I really believe by year 2 or 3, with today's rules, the way that the rules were geared towards the offense, all the rules as a quarterback are geared to make sure that you don't suck. If you're still mediocre or just bad by year 2 or 3, which is really what Lawrence is, he's mediocre, then I think that's just kind of who you are. And so I think the Jaguars are going to reflect that by being mediocre. And finally, Tennessee. I think the Titans are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. I just don't think Will Levis is a franchise quarterback. I think that this is his big audition, obviously, as being the Week 1 starter, and he had some good games last year after Ryan Tannehill's corpse completely washed up on shore. But I just think like the Tennessee has really always been just, ever since Steve McNair, they've just been irrelevant. I mean, even a couple years ago, does anybody remember a couple years ago when they got the 1 seed? Did anybody care? Like even when they're good, nobody really gives a shit about them. And especially now that when they're bad, they're going to be bad again, and they don't have a quarterback. I just they don't even have Derrick Henry there anymore. So they're going to be a bad, unwatchable football team in my opinion. And I have them going 3-14, which is also Carmelone's preferred age range. Now getting to the AFC West, and of course we start with the 2-time defending champion Kansas City Chiefs. Look, it's pretty simple here. You got Patrick Mahomes, you got Travis Kelce, you got Taylor Swift, Andy Reid, this Xavier Worthy fella, he seems like he could be a good rookie, and you have one of the best defenses in the league. Your title favorites for a reason. But really, as long as you combine Patrick Mahomes with a good defense, you're going to win 13 plus games. The only thing that can stop the Chiefs is themselves, with their stupid fumbles and their stupid drop passes. That's the only way that they're not going to win again this year, is if one of their players has a stupid turnover or one of their receivers drops an open pass. LA Chargers. Every single year it seems like we all think the Chargers are finally going to break out, and it ends up just being a joke on us. It's like Lucy pulling the football out from Charlie Brown at the last moment. But I do feel like they are due for a season where they actually perform well, and I think the large reason for that is because they do have Jim Harbaugh. I could see this being similar to when Harbaugh first went to the 49ers, and they went from being talented, underachieving team to a contender, winning 13 plus games. And the only difference is this time that Harbaugh has a much better quarterback, a much more talented quarterback than Alex Smith in Justin Herbert. So I do think actually that the Chargers are going to be pretty good this year, although unfortunately for them, they do play in the same division as the Chiefs, so they're gonna have to settle for a wild card spot. Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, they kept Antonio Pierce as their full-time head coach after he was the interim coach last year. I think this might have been a little bit of a mistake, because anybody by comparison looks good compared to Josh McDaniels as a head coach. But in reality, the biggest problem is, and it's somewhat similar to it's similar to any other situation, they don't have a quarterback. Gardner Minshew is their starting quarterback, and their backup is Aiden O'Connell, and they're just kind of, I just feel like they're going to alternate between those two guys all year, and both of them are just, mid to below average, and I just don't see them being anything special. I think they're going to be about 7-10. They're going to miss the playoffs. I think Max Crosby is going to have a great year. Devontae Adams will get his numbers because he's a great player, but I think it's going to be more of the same with the Raiders, where they just are just an afterthought at the end of the day. And finally, we end with Denver. And Denver, their descent since winning Super Bowl 50 continues in this prediction, according to me. And really, this is because I don't have faith in Bo Nix becoming good. But this is a prediction where if Bo Nix ends up being like this year's version of CJ Stroud, where he comes in and puts up great numbers and he shows he's actually good, and Denver ends up winning 10-11 games, it's basically all going to depend on whether or not Bo Nix is good or not. That's this entire prediction. Because if he ends up stinking, then it's just going to be more of the same that we've seen from Denver over the last 7 or 8 years, ever since they won the Super Bowl. But if he ends up becoming good, then they're still not going to be an elite team, but they're, having a good quarterback obviously goes a long way. But I am going to say that Bo Nix isn't going to be good, and the Broncos are going to be on the bottom of the division once again. Now we go over to the NFC, starting with the NFC East and my Philadelphia Eagles. Now, some of this, admittedly, might be some of me just having wishful thinking and me not wanting to admit that the slide that the Eagles had at the end of last year is going to continue into this year. But part of being a fan is being a fanatic. That's literally what the word fan is short for. And there's still plenty of talent on this team. And I'm going to go with the best case scenario, which is that the defense improves and the offense is able to keep up what they were able to do really in 2022 and for most of last season. And we once again go 13 plus wins like we did a couple years ago, and like we were on pace to last year before the bottom fell out at the very end. I don't know how it's going to track into the playoffs, but I have a feeling that Eagles are going to be very good again, or at least I'm just hoping. And with the power of hope, we can do so many incredible things. I think Barack Obama said that once. I don't know. Now we move on to the perennial laughingstock Dallas Cowboys, not because they're bad. In fact, it's quite the opposite reason. They're a laughingstock because no matter how good they are or successful they are in the regular season, we all know that they're going to crap their pants in the playoffs. And that's exactly what happened last year, and that's exactly what I think is going to happen again this year. I think they're once again going to finish around 12 wins. They're going to get a wild card spot, and they're going to completely crap their pants in either the wild card or the divisional round. Dak Prescott is probably going to throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, and you're going to have a bunch of people saying, he deserves his respect. And, I'm just like, no, I'm not going to respect him until he's able to show that he's able to go on a deep playoff run and actually play well for multiple playoff games and multiple playoff wins in a row without padding his stats against terrible teams. That's what he does. Anyway, so that's what to expect from Dallas. I feel like this is mostly the same team that it's been the last couple years, so I expect more of the same. And I look forward to laughing at them in January, and at the very worst, they will make me feel better about my own team's shortcomings. Moving on now to Washington. The NFC East is very, very top-heavy because you got two teams in Philly and Dallas who are very good and very talented and should win a lot of games, and then you got the bottom two teams, Washington and the Giants, who are two of the worst teams in the league. This is another one similar to Denver, where it really all depends on the rookie quarterback. This time, instead of Bo Nix, it's Jaden Daniels, and it's easy to confuse the two because both of them played 20 years in college and they're both in their mid-40s as rookies. But I think that although Jaden Daniels could become a very good quarterback, I think that he's probably going to have his typical rookie jitters, and I don't think the team around him is very good. And also, again, I say this all the time, and I don't even know if it's analysis, but it kind of is. It's Washington, dude. Like, that franchise just is. Since 1991, they've been terrible, and they don't scare anybody, and everything that can go wrong always does seem to go wrong. So I'm just expecting, maybe I'm being too harsh on them, saying they're only going to win 4 games, but I still don't think they're going to be relevant, so who gives a fuck whether they're 7-10 or 4-13? I think they're still going to be irrelevant either way. And finally, we get to the Giants, which basically the Giants really are kind of like the Florida Marlins of the NFL, if you really think about it, because the only thing separating them them from being one of the worst teams in the league over the last, 35 years is those 2 fluke playoff runs they had in 07 and 2011. It's a franchise that just annoy the fuck out of me as a division rival because they're held up as this blue blood elite franchise, and everyone's like, oh, well, they had, Lawrence Taylor and Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that was really they had a good run in the late 80s, but if you really look at their history since the late 80s, other than the late 80s and 1990 and the other 2 fluke Super Bowl runs, this team hasn't really done anything. This team, this franchise has been one of the worst franchises in the league since, the fucking 50s. So, and again, now they're still employing Daniel Jones. And their backup is Drew Lock, and they have a rookie wide receiver, and I'm like, there's nothing here. The only, dominant player they have is Dexter Lawrence, and they're just not a good team. They suck, and they don't even play in the same state as what their name is. So they're deceptive. It's false advertising. They're New Jersey instead of New York. So fuck the Giants. They're going to be 3-14 in my opinion. Going over to the NFC North, shout out to the Starks. That's a Game of Thrones reference in case you didn't get it. Starting off, I think the Green Bay Packers are going to win the NFC North this year. I think that Jordan Love, with another year of camaraderie with his receiving core and with the addition of Josh Jacobs, who's an incredible drunk driver, that the Packers will build on the second half of last season where Love was one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And here's the thing, and here's just a theory as a side note. I think their defense will be fine or whatever, but I just want to go off on this little tangent. I think Jordan Love is in a great situation right now, receivers-wise, because his receivers are anonymous enough to where he can spread the ball around without any of them publicly criticizing him for not getting the ball enough, like a star receiver would. So in a way, it's actually perfect to where the receivers aren't terrible, but they're all above average, but they're not superstars. So they're good enough to where they can actually produce and make plays, but they're not good enough to where you have to worry about babying them or giving them a certain amount of touches. You know what I'm talking about? So, and I always say that receivers, I think star receivers are it's very overrated for the most part, but I think that Jordan Love, he's in a perfect situation right now. Very similar to what Aaron Rodgers was earlier in his career when he had a great receiving core. And also just the fact that, like Rodgers and Favre, who each played forever and only won one championship, we are due for the mandated 1 Super Bowl ring that Jordan Love will win as he goes on to a Hall of Fame career that makes people wonder, wow, he got a ring, but why didn't he win more? So one of these years, the Packers are going to sneak out a Super Bowl win with Jordan Love, and then of course he'll go on to play 10, 15 more years, become a Hall of Famer, and everyone's like, wow, I can't believe he only won 1 Super Bowl. Is that going to be this year? I don't know, but I think they're going to be contenders. Then we get to the darlings of the NFL, which is Detroit. I think that Detroit is going to take a step back a little bit this year. They're not going to win the division. I think they're going to be a wild card team. And really, I think this is a team, I feel like I gotta admit, I thought for about midway through 2022 when they were 1-6 or 1-7 or whatever, and this was after Dan Campbell had a terrible first year. I really thought Dan Campbell was just going to be another one of those typical meathead, rah-rah type of coaches that last, only 2 years or so before washing out. But by golly, the Lions have actually done it. They've actually improved and gotten better, and they are aggressive on 4th down, which might have been their undoing in the NFC Championship game last year, but they have an identity, and somehow Jared Goff has resurrected his career. I think this is another year. Aiden Hutchinson's only going to get better with the more experience he gets. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jake Laporta-Potty at tight end, so this team is going to be, I think, very, very good again. But I think they're going to just be a casualty of just having another great team in the division, which is something that some quarterbacks, not naming names, never have to deal with in 20 years, is having to worry about another team winning more than 11 games in a season. Again, not naming names, Tom Brady. Moving on to the Chicago Bears. The Bears are going to be a bad team, but a fun team to watch because of Caleb Williams. I say it before, and it's really not going out on a limb because he's the fucking first overall pick, but I think he is going to be very, very special. His only bugaboo is that sometimes he holds the ball too long, but I think, he just has the it factor that you watch him play and you go, you know what? He has it. Unfortunately, I don't know how good the Bears defense is going to be, and you have morons who were kind of questioning, is Caleb Williams, was he a great leader? Because his USC teams didn't really win anything, even though his USC teams gave up literally 50 points a game. And I think in an odd way, that might actually help him prepare for the NFL, where you're constantly in a mode where you're not just blowing out every team and you have to constantly fight for things and fight for wins. I think that'll, in the long run, maybe not this year, but in the long run, I think that will help him a lot. I just don't think that Eberflus is the coach where if the Bears are going to have a turnaround, and also the Bears are playing in a good division with two very good teams with Green Bay and the Lions, so I just don't think that this year is going to be their year, and they don't have the right coach in place. But I do believe that they do have the building block, the biggest piece in place, which is Caleb Williams, and really in a few years, if they draft right and they improve their defense, they could really be contenders in short order. But this year, no. And finally, ending with Minnesota, look, the fact is that this is a team that is starting Sam Darnold. They have almost the opposite situation of Green Bay when it comes to receivers, where you got the best receiver in the league in Justin Jefferson and a guy like Jordan Addison. I don't even know, is Jordan Addison, is he going to play? I think he's going to be able to play because he's a bit of a jerk off the field, getting arrested. And maybe I'm a little bit too harsh on the Vikings, but I just feel like any team that's relying on Sam Darnold is going to be one of the worst teams in the league. So I have them going 2-15, despite the fact that they have a very good receiving core, and TJ Hawkinson's also a very good player. They lost Danielle Hunter to free agency. I don't really think much of Kevin O'Connell as a coach, so yeah, I think that they're going to be really, really bad this year. Really, whether or not JJ McCarthy got hurt or not. I think that JJ McCarthy, I didn't think he was going to be anything special, and that was before he ended up having the season-ending injury. But yeah, if you're relying on Sam Darnold to lead your team somewhere, then you're shit out of luck. Now we turn to the NFC South, which is a division that's so terrible, I am actually saying that a team quarterback by Derek Carr is going to win it, which is why I'm starting with the Saints. And honestly, I'm not going to spend too much time on this division because there's really nothing to say. New Orleans is whatever. They're the best of a bad bunch. I think they'll go 10-7, but there's no team in this division that is worth anything. Atlanta, it's going to be typical Kirk Cousins shit where he puts up nice stats and the Falcons end up losing about 3 or 4 games that they should win, but they don't, where Kirk throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and some weird shit happens at the end and they end up going 7-10 or something like that. It just happened. Think about this. The only 2 times in his career where Kirk Cousins won double-digit games, the year after was a fucking global pandemic for one of them, and the other one, he ended up tearing his Achilles. So really, for his own good and for everybody's own good, it's best that the Falcons don't win double-digit games this year. Then we get to Tampa Bay, who I also have finishing a 7-10, and that's really because I don't trust Baker Mayfield to play well in a season where he has expectations. He's the best guy at keeping his job when he has no expectations. When everybody thinks that he's finally washed out and he sucks and he's terrible, he goes out and he has a very good year like he had last year. But now again, there's actual expectations now, and throughout his career, we've seen this in Cleveland and elsewhere. When people expect him to have a big year, he just seems to, I don't know, self-combust and ends up throwing a bunch of picks and just ends up being dog shit. So I'm not falling for the Baker trap again. I have them going 7-10. And finally, we get to Carolina, and I don't want to spend too much time crapping on Bryce Young, but I mean, I just think Carolina is going to be one of the worst teams in the league again. I have them going 2-15, and maybe they won't be that bad, but who knows? Maybe they will be. Maybe they won't even be that good. Maybe they'll go 1-16. Who knows? But as long as they got Bryce Young quarterback, they're going to lose the majority of the games they play in because he's absolutely terrible, and he's not tall enough to ride most of the rides at Disney World, which is a problem when you're a starting quarterback in the NFL. And the thing is, because he was the first overall pick, he's going to get a lot of chances to show that he can actually play when he can't, because the team isn't going to want to admit that they whiffed badly on the pick. But eventually, like with all draft busted quarterbacks, eventually they're going to have to admit that they missed and move on from him if they ever want to be good again. And finally, we get to the last division, which is arguably the best division, the NFC West. And to nobody's surprise, I think that the San Francisco 49ers are going to win the division again because they have the best roster in football. They had the best roster in football last year, and they've had the best roster in football really for a couple years. So I don't see any reason why, especially now that they got Brandon Ayuk coming back, why they shouldn't continue to win a shitload of games and be in contention for the top seed in the NFC. But again, I will say this, I think that we all know how good they are and how star-studded they are, but they don't get nearly as much shit as the Dallas Cowboys do, when in reality, Dallas has won a Super Bowl more recently than the 49ers, which is still mind-blowing to me because of how many times in recent history the 49ers have had the best team in the league, basically, and blown it in the Super Bowl. Even just in the last 5 years, they've blown 2 Super Bowls to the Chiefs. But they're a team that Dallas will usually choke in the wild card or the divisional round. They don't choose to choke or embarrass themselves until the conference championship round or the Super Bowl, which in a way might actually be kind of worse, but whatever. Anyway, Anyway, so they're going to win the NFC West. They might actually win top seed. I don't know, but I wouldn't bet against it. I have the LA Rams finishing second in the division. I have them going 12-5. I think that Puka Nacua is going to have he's going to have a Cooper Cup 2021 type of season with Stafford there. I think that as long as, even without, the loss of Aaron Donald, obviously, is going to hurt them a little bit defensively. But I don't know. I just see them, I don't know why, but I see them getting 12 wins. I think that Stafford will have another solid season like he usually does. And I think Puka Nacua will really, really emerge as one of the best receivers in the league, which he already kind of is. But I think that he's going to have a, 140 catch type of season, similar to what Cooper Kupp had a couple years ago when he took over the league. So I have them winning 12 games. But at the same time, do I think they're good enough to win the Super Bowl? No, they're not the team. They're not the same team that they were a couple years ago when they got it done. Seattle, I think, is going to be right where they have been the last couple years. I think Geno Smith, we had the second part of his career, the resurrection of his career, and I talk about this. It's nice for Geno that he's no longer considered a historical draft bust, and he had one of the best comeback stories ever for a quarterback. But in the big picture, I still think he's more of an average quarterback. He's no longer a scrub, but he's kind of an average quarterback. He'll get you 25 or so touchdowns, 10 interceptions, but he's not a guy that you're afraid to play, even though he's capable of some incredible throws. At least that's the way I look at it. I think they're just going to be a mediocre team. That's just what my gut tells me. So they're going to be mediocre, even though I do like Witherspoon. I think he's going to be a stud for many, many years to come. But I don't really, there's not a lot of oomph on this roster to me outside of, Metcalf is good, but I just think that eventually for Seattle to be taken seriously again, they're going to have to get a better quarterback. And then finally, Arizona, I have them being one of the worst teams in the league. I have them going 2-15 also, along with Minnesota and Carolina. I think, having three teams go 2-15 might be a little bit outlandish and unrealistic, but I'm just going off of the schedule, what I think of the schedule, game by game. So that's what I found. I think that obviously Kyler Murray, I don't think he hasn't shown to this point in his career that he's capable of having a good full season of play. This is, I don't know, maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. will end up being, the next Randy Moss or the next Marvin Harrison. Ta-da. And that'll inspire Cardinals to go on a unforeseen run the way that, it seems like every year there's one team that everybody predicts is going to be dog shit that ends up being really good. Maybe that'll be the Cardinals this year. I don't think so, but they're just not a very good team. And I think eventually the only thing interesting really about Cardinals is seeing how much longer they're going to stay with Kyler Murray at quarterback instead of finally cutting bait and trying to find somebody else in the draft. So those are my team by team record predictions. Here are my award predictions and Super Bowl predictions. I think the MVP is going to be Josh Allen. I think this is going to be a year where he cuts down on the turnovers and he has a season very similar to 2020, which is the best season of his career to date. I don't know why, but I just feel like this is his time to have an MVP season. Offensive Player of the Year, I think Puka Nacua is going to dominate. Again, like I said, very similar to Cooper Kupp a couple years ago, so I think that's going to be his award. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm going to say Nick Bosa, especially after Trump's attempted assassination. I think that's going to motivate Bosa to do really, really well, and he'll probably finish with like 35 sacks or something. But all joking aside, I do think that he is primed for another Defensive Player of the Year award. There's no reason why he shouldn't win it. Offensive Rookie of the Year, easy for me. I think Caleb Williams is going to do it. I don't know if he'll be the first quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards in Bears history, but I think he'll be good enough to win that award. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Latu from the Colts. I just think he's going to be a stud. Comeback Player of the Year is Aaron Rodgers. He's really the only one I can think of. It's pretty amazing still to me that Damar Hamlin didn't win it last year after literally coming back from the dead, but I digress. I think Coach of the Year is going to be Jim Harbaugh for him being able to turn around the Chargers. The AFC Championship, I think, once again, Kansas City is going to win the AFC, and they're going to beat Buffalo. So Mahomes will once again be the really monolith that stands between, and road bump that stands between the Bills, Josh Allen, and success. Hey, the Bills lost 4 Super Bowls in a row, so there's no reason why they can't lose 4 playoff games to the Chiefs in 5 years. The NFC Championship, I think San Francisco wins the NFC again, but they defeat Green Bay this time. Very soon. in a rematch of the 2019 Conference Championship game. And Super Bowl 59, I think we have a rematch of Super Bowl 58, and it's the same outcome: Kansas City over San Francisco. Patrick Mahomes once again wins MVP, and yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, that's just what my gut tells me. It's gonna be incredible to see him win, or maybe the 49ers will finally break through on their third try against Mahomes to shut him down. Who knows? But right now, Mahomes is the main character in the league, and it all seems to go back to him. So I think he and the Chiefs are going to complete the first three-peat in the Super Bowl era and get Mahomes his fourth ring.